What do men want?
Manifests itself in relationships, and you feel it in relationships, and they can be very powerful spiritually. And if that's what you need, that's what you should go for.
And she said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. You're watching public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Today, we're taking a black perspective, or look at a black perspective of men's issues. And we're fortunate to have as a guest Judge Tommy Jewell. And Judge Jewell is with the 2nd Judicial District Children's Court. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike.
We were talking a little bit before the program began, and you thought that it was important to look at the difference between adult and children's court. Maybe we could just start out by talking about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, children's court is basically a creation of statute, if you will. There is a children's code which sets a different standard for child behavior and adult behavior as it relates to children. And so cases under the Children's Code are adjudicated in children's court. And they basically fall into two categories. One category is called the abuse and neglect case, and that involves cases where parents are alleged to have either abused or neglected children that are in their care and custody. And typically in those cases, the state, through the Human Services Department, is seeking to shelter those children who are not being treated properly by their parents. And the other type of case is called the delinquency case, and that involves kids in trouble, basically. And a delinquent act is one which, if committed by an adult, would be a crime. But the language, unlike the criminal code, is quite different in the children's code. We don't try kids, we adjudicate them. We don't sentence kids, we commit them. And underpinning that difference is a philosophy that we can, in the instance of children acting out, rehabilitate them. And so that is our attempt with delinquent children. There is a third category of child under the Children's Code that is entitled with the acronym CHINS, and that means Children in Need of Supervision. And those are children who commit acts that would not be criminal if they were adults. And those acts are, for example, running away from home, being truant from school, curfew violations. And so the court, the judges actually rarely see CHINs. Typically CHINs are handled through the probation department. But those are basically the three types of cases that are handled in children's court: the abuse and neglect case, the delinquency case, and the CHINs case. We spoke a little bit earlier, I guess, about a number of topics. Let me ask you, how, in the youngsters that you see,
Are the majority of them from places where, or from homes where both parents are not there, or from broken homes? I guess what I'm asking is, could you give us is there a typical youngster that appears to in front of your bench?
Mike, I don't know if there's a typical youngster. Let me say this. Interestingly enough, I was reading an article that the late Judge John Brown, the first full-time children's judge in Albuquerque, had participated in by way of interview. And he referred to the 10 percenters.
Uh-huh.
And you can definitely see a common thread running all the way through this system. From the abuse and neglect, you can predict that that kid is going to be involved in delinquent behavior, and you can predict that that kid is going to go on and graduate into adult criminal behavior.
And that's the 10%, you think? Or that's the 10 percenters you're talking about?
That's right.
Let's take a short break for a public service announcement. We hope you'll stay with us. We're talking with Judge Tommy Jewell of the 2nd Judicial District Children's Court. We'll be right back.
There is a mighty spirit shining out.
In Salisbury, Maryland, the hungry are being fed. In Wind Falls, Indiana, a man who learned to read at 47 is making sure others learn earlier. In Hope, New Mexico, people turned an abandoned school into a thriving community center. In Boston, Massachusetts, neighbors set up a crime hotline that's making their streets safer. From Seattle to Galveston, from Buffalo to Fargo, every day, someone in America is doing something to light up another life. But there is so much more to do. The light to do it is within us all. We only need to share it. Contact the Points of Light Foundation. Do something good. Feel something real.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. We're speaking with Judge Tommy Jewell of the 2nd Judicial District Children's Court. And you guys are winning some, aren't you?
I think that there are a lot of instances where the children's court does a lot of good and turns it around for kids. So in that sense, yeah, we're winning. Of course, the publicity that you see is about the negatives, about the kids who are acting out. You know, we hear just quite a bit about the violent activity of youngsters nowadays, about the gang activity, about the shootings. You hear about the problem kids, but you don't hear much about the kids that we turn it around for. The abuse and neglect proceedings in the court are sequestered or secret, and so you don't hear much about them. But I think that's actually where the cycle begins. And when I referred to Judge Brown's 10 percenters, that for me is illustrative of the fact that there are predictors that you can look to in the lives of some of these kids and determine the direction that they're headed given those predictors.
A lot of, I know some of the guys that I've talked to and read about in current men's literature in our quote-unquote men's movement, assuming there actually is one, is the fact that a lot of our youngsters are missing stewardship and mentorship, especially young men getting that kind of nurturing and direction from older men, and that a lot of gang activity is the attempt of those young men to mentor and steward themselves and learn about the world themselves with the absence of having a male role model. And I'm wondering, do you think that's true, or?
Mike, I think to some degree that there's truth in that. I would make another observation, though, that gangs and gang activity have been a part of life in Albuquerque for a number of years, at least during my short period here in Albuquerque,
Sure.
and I
grew up here. Yeah.
There have been gangs. I guess what we see now that is rather alarming is the availability of weapons, of guns. We also see the insurgence of outside influences on the internal gangs that are here. For instance, for criminal enterprise like drug sales and transport. And so that phenomena, those two phenomena, the availability of weapons and the influence of outsiders on local gangs, I think is real alarming. But the gangs themselves, I think, have existed. And I think, you know, if we look at some of the institutions that we participate in them, they take on the tendencies of gangs, the peer camaraderie and modeling is something. I look at, you know, the judges. I tell kids sometimes, yeah, well, you know, I'm in gangs. I'm in a gang of judges. I play in a band. I am in a college fraternity. But I mean, those are positive, socially acceptable gangs. And so I guess if we are going to try to intervene, what we need to do, and this is kind of an armchair analysis, is try to turn those institutions, gangs, into positive institutions.
And I think that most young men are receptive to that, and young women, you know, because they're also gang members. It seems to me that there's not bad kids out there just trying to do bad stuff. It seems there's just a lack of influence of someone coming down and saying, you know, we can win. You know, if the system does work, you can succeed in it if you try, and this is how you do it. And there's no one, of course, I'm you know, this is here for you to say, but I feel that a lot of it is just a lack of life skills, of being able to identify problems and having someone saying, well, this is how life works. You know, these are the steps you can take to get from A to Z, and if you do this, this is the task you'll have, but this will be the reward on the other end. It just doesn't seem like there's that nurturing. It's missing somewhere, not just in our whole society somehow. And and the thing you were talking about, you guys are winning a lot down there, and the focus is on the ones that are losing. You know, it's the sensationalism of the violence. It's instead of looking at you know, I saw, and you said you didn't see it, but there was a great movie that a black man did called Boys in the Hood, and it was a great study of a black adult male with a young son living in inner city Los Angeles who was doing everything he could to walk that young man through his teenage years and through the violence of gangs and drug addiction and dealing and all that stuff into some sort of a better life. And it was just indicative of a lot of men I've seen in America right now, black, white, brown, yellow, and red, who would like to see or who are making an attempt to stand in the face of a lot of negativity and a lot of social disintegration. I think that's real important. Do you have any? You were telling me, you know, you didn't grow up in inner city or anything. Do you have any perspectives on being black in America right now? Well,
My perspective obviously is colored by my own upbringing and rearing right here in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Sure.
I am the son of a school teacher, and my mother was educated as well, and always had an intact family. You know, probably lower middle class, never just really poverty-stricken. But you know, regardless of economic status, there are values that my parents were able to hand down. You know, my parents made sure that we were connected to a church, that and my parents are still active in the community, are very community service oriented. Perhaps that's why I gravitated to the judiciary. I don't think I initially planned on being a judge. I know that I wanted to be a lawyer quite early on, but you know, I had an opportunity to become a judge and took advantage of that opportunity, and really gives me a sense of fulfilling that need for community service that I feel as a result of my upbringing. With respect to the condition of black men nationally, I think it's a very tough time. I think it historically has been tough for black men, probably tougher for black men than for black women. My reading of history indicates that in slavery, black women were not as much a threat as black men, and so black men were treated much more harshly than black women. And the myth of the black matriarch kind of derives from that, that the black woman had to be strong. And so, you know, a lot of times the black male is portrayed as being weak and being away. You mentioned earlier the statistic regarding the numbers of black men incarcerated or on probation outnumbering those in our educational institutions.
Statistics in D.C. are that if you're a young black male in Washington, D.C., you have a better chance of going to the penitentiary than you do of going to college, and you have a better chance of being shot and killed than you statistically than if you were in country Vietnam during the war. Mm-hmm. So that's a heavy bag to have handed to you just by the society you live in. So.
Oh, sure. That's environmental, and you can see that not only in Washington D.C., but you know that same theme runs across most urban areas. It's very bad, I would think, and I don't see it getting better. It looks to be getting worse as the economy worsens.
Well, there's a real disintegration in the middle class, I think, because so much of it is economic. Mm-hmm. And as the families, you know, you were mentioning in our conversation, you had a mom there, you had a dad there, you had obviously people who believed in community, believed in education, and believed the system would work. And you know, to come from a place where the family is completely disintegrated. None of us are saints, and life is hard. You have society hand you, you know, statistics like the one we were talking about. It's going to do things to you. The other factor, of course, in that is one that a lot of people from my generation took a while to wake up to, was that if you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol a great deal of the time, your life is going to be pretty messed up. And if you know, something that a lot of people don't realize is that an honest dollar is worth about, I mean, one honest, hard, little minimum wage buck that somebody, you know, swept floors to get is worth, you know, 100,000 crooked dollars. I mean, it really is. And I don't know how you make people understand that, but it's true. Do you have any advice for people who might be in that situation?
Well, you know, again, I think in terms of my own life, at some point I went back to the value that the community service that I could provide was more important than the money that I could make. I think when I was 15 or 16, I said, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. And so that was real important to me. When 30 came around, I wasn't a millionaire, and I did go through the thought process, you know, why am I not a millionaire? And found that it really wasn't important to me to be a millionaire. It's more important to me to provide a service. And I feel a sense of self-pride and worth out of what I do. As you said, I think there were probably opportunities for me to make, I don't know about 100,000 crooked dollars, but certainly those opportunities are there. And those symbols are definitely flashed at us all the time. You know, the Cadillac, the fast car, the fast girl. But the values have to be there so that you can resist those symbols.
You know, we have about a minute to tape, but it sounds to me like you caught something that took me to almost 38 to catch. And that is that there's that we have to get a sense of purpose in our lives, I think, sometimes. And it is that sense of purpose, I believe, that sense of vocation or reason for being here. And all of our lives count, every one of them. It matters that we're doing the struggle. No matter how long we feel, it matters that we're struggling. And I think it's that sense of purpose that brings this world out here of honest and crooked dollars in contact with this world inside of us. And it's that place and that commitment where the two of them meet. And it sounds like you got that at a young age. I wish I would have been that smart when I was 15, 16. We have a tape, and we hope you'll stay with us. We're going to be right back.
If this doesn't scare you, just wait.
The doctor will see you now.
One night a year ago, Vanessa got high with some guy and forgot everything she learned about preventing AIDS. Now her life is the horror show. AIDS, another way drugs can kill.
Anything you want to ask me is fine.
Okay.
If you see anything. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Welcome back to Speaking of Men. This is Public Access Television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am your host, Mike Rivas, and we're fortunate today to have Judge Tommy Jewell of the 2nd Judicial District Children's Court, and our theme is a black perspective of men's issues.
You know, Mike, before we were taping, you had indicated to me that it was real important that we start finding some things in common. There are so many things in America that divide us. Race is most apparent because, I mean, we can tell who's black and who's white.
Sure.
But, I mean, we have so much in common. And if we begin to come together and use that commonality, I think we're going to solve a lot of America's problems. And I think that's particularly important when things get economically tough, because that's when we tend to point the finger at each other, those of us particularly at the bottom of the economic ladder. In our pain, we cry out, and we think, you know, that disproportionately there are people who don't want to participate and give as much as we do. But I think for the majority of people, that's not the case. And I think that most people want to be healthy, productive citizens, and given that opportunity, they will be.
I agree with you. I think that I say this a lot, and I'll say it again on this program. I think that America is beginning a healing. We haven't had that, I don't think, in America since the Kennedy assassination years and years ago. I think that that was, well, when Lyndon Johnson had the Great Society concept, it seemed like there was a belief that America could heal, that we could come together, that we could heal our wounds, and we could become a people. And I think that's beginning to awaken again. And I think that I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with you on that 100%. One of the things that I know I have to work on is just blame, not just, you know, against another race or whatever, but just blaming society or blaming something out there. If it wasn't there, my life would be okay. And that's not the way it is. I think we can do some things about us, you know, and that's where it starts, is with each of us.
One area that I'd really like to see us work on, though, is reducing the level of violence in our society. You know, I don't know if that means gun control or what, but one thing that is happening in the judiciary, though, is the advent of alternative dispute resolution methods, one of which is mediation. And I'm finding that a lot of the problems that come to court are better resolved through mediation than through litigation. And the difference is that a judge sits as the final decision maker in litigation, and the disputants come up with their own solution in mediation. So I think that you'll see a lot of that, and you speak about accepting the value that's in the diverse cultures that make up America, and we can do that even in the judiciary. Many of the cultures that make up America are not used to retributive justice system. What I mean by that is when somebody does something bad, we lock them up and put them in jail, and basically it's on society to support the person that's done something wrong. Whereas in some societies, it's a restorative base. If somebody does something to hurt you, if somebody takes your property, then the responsibility is placed on you to make them whole. And I see us coming around to that. We're doing some of that in the children's court. There's more of that in the civil courts, and I see it emerging in the criminal court as well.
A dialogue is important, isn't it?
Very.
Being able to talk and mediate. I'm really interested in, I wish we'd have gotten to speak more together before the program, but the whole concept of mediation is, as you say, has been, well, in divorce, and now in all kinds of emotionally charged situations. Well, I guess we're just down to last couple of minutes. Anything you'd like to say that we haven't covered?
Well, I would just like to say that I sincerely enjoy my work in the children's court. I think, you know, I have found my niche. I've been in the judiciary for about 8 years. I was in Metropolitan Court for 7.5 years. So I've seen a good number of people, and I think I've been able to help a good number of people. And it's just very rewarding to see them at a very young age and to be able to turn it around for them at that level.
You guys are not out to get anybody. You're there basically to try and help, aren't you?
That's basically the philosophy of children's court and the children's code, yes.
That's great. We'd like to thank you for joining us on today's program, those of you at home, and we would also like to thank Judge Jewell for coming down and spending 30 minutes with us on an off day probably for him.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
And hope you'll come back again sometime. Maybe we can talk again. Thank you for joining us. We are Speaking of Men. We're always looking for your input. If you have some ideas, the number on the screen at the end. Shoot from the hip, love from the heart. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.